What's the weirdest Craigslist transaction you've ever taken part in? I was buying some bicycle parts from a kid in Manhattan, and I showed up at the corner where we were meeting. A guy walked up looking for someone, and I assumed it was my guy, and we started walking down the block and chatting. Eventually, he asks what he can do for me, and I'm like, I'm here for crank arms? The what? The crank arms. Wait, are you selling bike parts? Fairly certain that corner was double booked to a drug dealer too. The guy was nice though, and we laughed it off and then found the right people that we were there to meet. Bought a turtle once on Craigslist. The girl who was selling it was very sad to be parting with her pet, which she'd had for over 10 years, but her parents were getting a divorce and her living situation was in transition. Kept the turtle for a year, then had to get rid of it myself, so I posted on Craigslist. Guess who was the first person who responded? Humphrey and his original owner have reunited after a long year apart. It seemed a serendipitous ending, and I felt quite good about it at the time. Not necessarily weird, but my most memorable Craigslist experience, I had to sell my parrotlet Guapo, as I did not have the time for him with me in college and working full-time. Parrots require a lot of attention. He was an expensive bird, but I didn't want to make money off of him. I put him on Craigslist and got a few inquiries that I did not feel comfortable about. Then I got an email from the most bird couple I could ever imagine. I didn't realize bird people were a thing until I got a parrot. They had converted their home into a bird sanctuary after their kids moved out, and they had a sad female parrotlet which needed a buddy. They sent me photos of her and their home. They had quite a few other birds, and their home looked like a very well-kept exotic bird zoo. It was amazing. She said they did not have a lot of extra money after taking in all these birds, but wanted to give him a good home. I sold him to them for $150 with his large cage, toys, and playground. They came and got him, and the woman was crying happy tears to finally have a buddy for their parrotlet. They were very kind. Guapo was the first and only pet I have ever had to give up, and I have no regrets about giving him to that couple. It was a win for all involved. Traded a lowrider bicycle for a homemade cheesecake. I just wanted the bike out of my house. Still have the plate she delivered it on. Traded my Xbox One for a PS4 Destiny edition last year. That itself wasn't weird, but then I pulled up to the house, and it was a 6'4", 400-pound muscle-bound guy with tattoo sleeves and a giant beard. Needless to say, I was a little bit apprehensive at that point, but I went into his house anyway to test everything. I asked him why he was selling his console, and he said that his kids wouldn't use it. That turned into a 2-hour-long conversation spanning marriage, kids, jobs, politics, and everything else. This guy turned out to be one of the biggest teddy bears and the nicest person I've ever met in my life. He even texted me to make sure I got home okay. Maybe mine is mostly tame, but it was caused by my absent-minded mother. She was buying a used camera from someone on Craigslist. Nice camera, $50. Of course, she can't be bothered to get it, so off I get sent. I was 32, a male, and doing my mother a favor. Well, she told the person to meet at some restaurant nearby. Turns out it closed down 2 years prior and now was a dilapidated building surrounded by a similarly dilapidated fence. The seller shows up and is clearly scared out of her mind. She was a tiny Asian girl, like barely 20, in an abandoned parking lot with some guy that was not a woman that she was supposed to be selling to. She barely cracks her window and I go full apology, explaining that I have no idea why on earth she had us meet up in literally the most creepy place we could possibly be, and that I honestly just want to pay for the camera, meant no harm, and was going to be berating my mother after I see her for setting us up like this. She relaxed, I paid for the camera, and then informed my mother I wasn't picking up anything for her again unless I set the location just in case she picked a crack house next time. My mother is an airhead. My parents' dachshund died, and they put an ad on Craigslist looking for another. Not interested in papers, etc. A couple of days later, they get a call from a guy who says he might have a dog for them, and they decide to meet in the lot of a PetSmart. He gets out of his truck and hands my dad a beautiful half-year-old long hair. My dad says, "This is a nice dog." The guy says, "Thanks," and then gets back in his truck and drives away. He just handed the dog to my father and then left without any introduction, explanation, information, or conversation. I've told this story before, but I had an entertainment center advertised and a woman asked to come over to have a look at it. We set up a time, and when the time came, she didn't show up. I texted her a couple of hours later. She replied and asked if it was too late to come by. It was 10 p.m., but I said okay. She said she would be there in 10 minutes, but wasn't there 20 minutes later, and I texted her again. 10 more minutes, she said, but she hadn't shown up by 11 p.m., so I texted again and said that we would have to do it another day. And she replied that she was just pulling up. I go to my front door, and sure enough, she's pulling into the driveway, and there are about 4 or 5 other people in the car with her. They all get out and start walking towards the door, and I ask them what they are doing, and the woman said that they all want to see the entertainment center. I tell her that only she can come in, and at that point I wasn't sure I even wanted her to come in. She says she needs at least one other person's opinion. I say no, and she gets indignant, and I ask her to leave, and she says that I'm not being a very good Christian. I say I am fine with that and went into my house and locked all the doors, peeking out the window. One of the dudes who was with her is pissing at the end of my driveway, and then they get in the car and drive away. The whole thing was super bizarre. I was selling a cheap microwave and a bunch of other stuff when I moved in with my now wife. The guy has some offbeat questions about it, but wanted to meet and take a look. When we meet, he's a mid to late 20s guy in a very nice Porsche. Seems like a good dude. He gives it a good look over and starts to giggle. I ask what's up and he replies, "Oh, I can't wait until they see it explode. Red flags." I ask what he means by that, and he explains that he's a chemistry teacher at a local yet nationally known technical high school. During his summer session, they'll use it for lots of various things, but at the end of the session, they'll take it out to the middle of the field and blow it up. They'll record it with high-speed cameras and do an analysis of the reaction. Woo! In the end, I got my $20 and some smart high schoolers got to explode crap. Win-win. About 3 years ago, I was selling my PS Vita because I needed the money, and I wasn't using it enough to warrant keeping it. I had an ad up on Craigslist for it for about a week and a half for about $200, including all the games, which were about 4 or 5. After a week and a half, I wasn't getting any bites, so I lowered it to $175. A day or two later, finally someone contacted me about it. I met him at the Panera in my town because it was a pretty busy public space, and if he was a sketchy person or dangerous, he couldn't necessarily rob me or whatever. When I met him there, I saw he was a tall guy in his mid-20s. I was around 15 at the time, and I wasn't too keen on meeting strangers, but I needed to sell the thing. I wasn't about to get ripped off at GameStop. So I gave him the Vita to look at it, and he seemed like he was annoyed. He asked if it came with any games, and I said yeah, I did include that in the ad. He demanded show me the games, in the sternest voice I had heard. I just handed them over to him. He looked them over for a good 30 seconds and said, "This is the worst collection of games I've ever seen in my life. How could you charge extra for the games?" First off, I wasn't charging extra for the games. The man was furious at the games I had with the Vita. I didn't really say anything in response. He told me to take the price down to $150 or he wasn't buying it. I said no, that I was staying at $175 with or without the games. He then got really mad. I was nervous enough as it was, but he was really angry. Like his face was getting red and he was about to cry. He hyperventilated for like 10 seconds and people started to look at us. Without saying anything, he handed me 4 $50 bills, took the Vita and the games and ran away. Like grabbed them and ran as fast as he could away. I just took the money and went home. Glad I didn't get hurt. Was selling an electric lawnmower. This wacky lady came to look at it and asked me a ton of questions. I give her an extension cord so that we can start it up, so she knows it works. That wasn't enough for her, so she asked if she could test it out. She took it on a test drive for 20 minutes where she mowed my entire backyard. She bought it for my asking price, and I got my lawn mowed for free. When I was 16 and Craigslist wasn't huge yet, I was pretty naive. I put up an ad for my guitar amp. This guy emailed me and was excited to get this amp. I gave him my address and told him I'd be home at 5. I was a bit late and got home at 5:15. I went downstairs to get the amp for the guy and I couldn't find it, so I called my parents and asked where they put it. No one knew where it was. We looked for a couple of hours, then I got an email from the guy and it went something like this. "Hi there, I got to your house at 5 and no one seemed to be there. The door was unlocked though, so I went in to make sure that no one was hurt or something. I looked around and found the amp in your basement. I hid $100 underneath your kitchen table. Luckily nothing was missing, but it was just weird that he walked through our whole house looking for this amp." About 10 years ago, I met up with a guy at his apartment in the sketchier part of the city to buy a bike. It's an old school, steel frame road bike, so nothing fancy. I just needed a commuter for college. The apartment had no outside lights, kinda creepy as it was already dark outside. The guy met me outside, seemed very nice, and said that he had the bike in his apartment and needs me to take it down because he had a broken arm. He was in a cast, so I said okay. I went in. It was a large studio apartment with a couple of bikes hooked on the ceiling. The shades and lighting made it seem like the whole place was under a sepia filter. I got the bike and completed the transaction. As I was going to the door, he blurts out, "What size are you?" "What? What size shirt do you wear?" I was very confused, but answered anyways. "Large, sometimes medium." He went to his closet and took out a garment bag, opens it, and takes out a nice navy blazer. "I got this a couple of years ago, but barely wore it, since I changed jobs. I have no use for it. You want it?" I was still very confused, thinking this was some kind of ploy, but I wanted to see where it went, since I was a penny-scraping college student. Sure, if it fits." I tried it on. It fits perfectly. Well, it's yours. Thanks. I shook his hand and left with the bike and a nice navy blazer, the nicest piece of clothing I owned at the time. I still have that blazer to this day. I was buying a 24-inch computer monitor for dirt cheap. The seller moved the conversation to Facebook. I guess they wanted to see who I was. We agreed on the price and a location to pick it up. She was quite unresponsive though. It would take sometimes days, even weeks, before I got a response from them. I finally managed to get a hold of her and set a time to pick it up. Only when I got there, the house was pitch black. I checked my messages and she sent me a text that she had left the monitor. At the time, this was a $300 monitor, on the curb. She wanted me to put the money in the mailbox and leave. So there I was, in the rain, dressed all in dark clothing, looking like a street burglar. I walked up to the house, and wouldn't you know it, the monitor is just sitting there unguarded underneath a small awning. I dropped my money in the box and made to pick up the monitor and leave. Just then I hear crying. The sound of a small child crying became more and more audible with every second. I grabbed the monitor, stuck it in my car, and booked it. She later messaged me thanking me for being honest. Turns out she was busy with a newborn daughter the entire time and couldn't really leave the house. I mean, that's great for you, but lady, could you be less ominous? The monitor worked fantastically. A guy was having an estate sale and said that he wanted us to email him for the address, since he didn't want too many random people at his house where his family is. Completely reasonable. 2 weeks later, I get an email from him with a link that says to go to this website to confirm the attendance and a list of items for his sale. I go there, and it's a site with pictures of his daughters and his family. The headline of the website says, "This is the family this divorce is tearing apart." My sister had her bike stolen from the communal hallway in her apartment building. She filed a police report, but was basically told there was no hope that she was going to get it back. So she started looking around for a replacement. She ended up seeing her stolen bike listed on various selling sites, so she arranged to view it. Once she saw it in person, she knew for sure it was hers, so she hopped on it and pedaled off. As a poor college kid, I made arrangements to pick up some free Craigslist kitchen appliances that someone said they'd leave in their alley. When the day came, nothing was there, so I went around to the front to see if someone had already picked it up. The elderly gentleman who entered the door had never heard of Craigslist. We started talking and he asked if I wanted to come in since his dogs kept trying to escape outside. This morphed into a tour of the house since he had just recently renovated it and was very proud of his new patio. I got the sense that his daughters, whose photographs were all over, didn't visit very often. His wife had already passed away. After about half an hour, we settled down in the living room with the incredibly adorable dogs and mellow yellows. He starts offering me $20, $40, $60 since I had admitted to scrounging through alleys for free stuff. I decline. The Afghan I'd been leaning on was made with his dog's hair. I remember that A, nobody actually knows I came here, and B, I had work in an hour, so I left. I had a great little computer I was selling on Craigslist. It was about 3 years old and it was running strong. A mother and her young son were driving 2 hours out to meet me at my house so that they could purchase the computer. I had a whole computer set up ready for them to see the grand display. They walked in the door, we shook hands and made pleasantries, then proceeded to go over to the computer. I showed him the computer, I turned it on and stepped back so that he could do his checks to make sure everything was working. Right as he touched the mouse, the computer blue-screened and never turned on again. I proceeded to turn bright red in the face and explain how this has never happened before. Posted an ad looking for a walking partner because it was getting boring doing it myself. Someone responded. We chatted a while, exchanged pictures for recognition purposes, and agreed on a time and place. So I show up. She drives up. I introduce myself, she does too, and we start walking. She was polite but not very talkative, and at one point took a phone call. All in all, it was a pretty good walk. Afterwards, we said our goodbyes and I went home. To find my inbox with several emails over the last hour from my walking partner, the first one apologizing for being a couple of minutes late, and subsequent and increasingly frustrated emails asking where I was. It was about that time I realized that I somehow managed to run into someone who was a dead ringer for the person I was supposed to meet, at the place and time I was supposed to meet her, who also had the same name. I explained the situation and apologized profusely. She didn't seem to believe me and stopped responding. I didn't blame her for it. I'd have found it pretty far-fetched as well. Should have exchanged phone numbers, I guess. I still wonder sometimes if the person I walked with thought I was insane or just really outgoing. Last year, a friend and I were looking for an old CRT TV to use in our dorm room to play some Melee without any input lag. Well, after searching for a long time, we found one that cost about $30 and was only about a 10-minute drive from his house. I picked him up and drove to the seller's house to pick up the TV. While we were checking out the TV and making sure it worked properly, we started talking to the seller. It turns out that he had the TV since college and was finally parting with it because his fiancée wanted it out of the house. We asked him what college he attended, and we weren't too surprised to find out it was the same college that we were about to start at. However, it got weird when we found out that he used to live in our future dorm, and it became ridiculous when we found out that we would be in the same room that he lived in. My friends and I returned the TV to the same room it had been in 10 years ago. Bought an iPad from a woman who was selling it because she was trying to afford her kid's prescription and some groceries. She wanted $75 for a current year iPod Touch, and at the store was $200+. When I was leaving with my cash, I realized I had a $50-ish gift card for a grocery store that had no locations where I was, but had a few where she was. So I took that too and told her it had at least 50 on it. I wasn't sure how much more, but it might do her some good. She started crying. Apparently, that was the pharmacy her kids' meds were in, and the gift card would give her a discount somehow. I'm not sure what the deal was. She was sobbing. It had something to do with my card being older and having a loyalty program they still honored, but they didn't sell anymore. She tried to sell the iPod to me for $25, but at the time, I had a steady job and could afford it. Plus, I was desperate for a working iPod, and hers was nicer than any of the others offered. It still had its original box and receipt. I think it was a Christmas gift. This lady made me come in and have a soda, since my ride was going to be late, and she started telling me about how she lost her job and then her kid got pneumonia, and she had been so frightened to use Craigslist and give her address, but she was alone with the kids and couldn't take the sick one out into the cold. She was so glad I was a young woman in scrubs, not some scary person. I got to hold her baby, not the sick child, and we chatted. I kinda wish she had lived closer to us. I would have offered to babysit sometimes so that she could get a dang break, but it was a 2.5-hour drive to her, and while I was happy that she could use the old gift card and really happy to have the iPod, I was not driving that far again, considering I worked 40 hours a week and usually slept through my weekends. I was selling my bicycle, which served as my loving daily ride to work and school, for $200. A guy answered my Craigslist ad for it and made it clear that he didn't want to stand around talking about it and haggling for a long time. He showed up in a minivan with an interior that looked like it had been used to haul improperly loaded bowling balls and cinder blocks. Inside were about 20 other bikes. He threw $200 at me, grabbed the bike, threw it in, and drove off. I was trying to sell a pair of old ski boots. I find out that the guy I'm meeting is deaf-mute. I don't know sign language, and I didn't have my phone on me to type him messages. That went about as well as it could be expected. I used to go pick up free crap and sell it. One time, somebody posted leftover garage sale stuff, and there were like 50 pictures of computers and electronics. I was at the address maybe 15 minutes after they posted it. I get out of my car and some Asian guy pulls up. Our eyes meet and we both start throwing everything we can into our cars as quickly as possible. He didn't have a method. He was just grabbing anything. I was grabbing anything that I knew could sell. After I filled my car, I looked at his, which was mostly full of junk. But we looked over in the end, and there was a crappy table that we had uncovered. I started to drive away, and he looked defeated. Not my transaction, but something I witnessed. As a disclaimer, it may not have been exactly Craigslist, but something in that vein. I was at Walgreens once, roughly evening time, and noticed two men meeting out front, a young guy and a middle-aged one. They seemed ill at ease, but I didn't really think anything of it until later. I walked around the store a bit, then ran into them again in the aisle closest to the door. It seems that they moved inside due to the better lighting. What they were doing was circling each other, each holding onto a cell phone with one hand and a wad of money with the other. I'm not sure who was doing the selling, but they obviously met to sell the cell phone, and I believe the older man did not trust the younger to hold up his end of the bargain. After a few minutes of this, an employee broke in to mediate, and then they went their separate ways. I put up an ad on Craigslist for a free dryer, stating that the thing worked, but it needed a new heating element. It was old. I didn't feel like repairing it, and I needed a bigger dryer anyway, so I put it out on the curb with a sign that said free dryer, works, but needs a new heating element. The thing was gone in like 10 minutes. I don't know if someone was driving by or because of the Craigslist ad. I was just glad it was gone. Like 6 months later, we're coming home from vacation and I see this weird thing in my yard. And it's the frickin' free dryer I put out 6 months ago. My sign was still on it, but someone had crossed out my needs heating element line and angrily scrawled needs heat, asshole. Who does that kind of crap? I was selling my old 2002 Hyundai Accent after an aftermarket timing belt snapped and ruined one of the pistons. Wouldn't hold compression afterward. I put an ad on Craigslist for $500. It barely starts up, let alone runs, but someone could part it out for more than that. Wouldn't you know it, I had a response in 11 minutes. 11. He says he'll pay $500 if I take the ad down to hold it for him. I happily oblige. A few days later, we meet up, and out from an old Cadillac comes the two biggest, blackest guys I've ever met in my life. They get right up close to me and say, "You selling the car?" We look it over, show them that there are no oil leaks, show them the brakes, etc. I explain I really don't recommend driving this thing in its current state. He gives me a big smile and says, "To each his own, man." He gives me $500, I sign the title and watch him pitter-putter away on the little 2D, probably won't go faster than 20 miles per hour. Went way better than expected, which is what made it so weird for me. I was selling my laptop, and the guy wanted to meet about 20 minutes away in a Lowe's parking lot. A friend and I go, pull in, and find the parking lot is dead. The Lowe's is long gone, and it's a creepy, dark parking lot. The guy then pulls up. He seems a little off, but I can't quite place it. Then he looks at the laptop, says it's good, then asks if I want to ride with him to his bank to get the money. For whatever reason, I said sure. I got in his car where he had Batman audio tapes playing. We get the money and he drops me back off. Everything went fine, but it was creepy. Nothing that weird, but someone posted that they had free dirt left over from a landscaping renovation. My dad decided that we needed some of that dirt, so we drove over there and shoveled it into the truck. I suppose the listing was certainly honest. It was dirt and it was free. A few months after moving into a new, very small house with my girlfriend, I decided I needed a desk for the room that I use as my studio. I looked around on Craigslist and found a huge hardwood desk for free, but I had no idea how huge until I showed up with my neighbor who had a truck to help me haul it. It is like 250 pounds, and we struggled to get it in the door. It turns out literally to take up over 2/3 of the studio. My girlfriend hates it. She's mad that I even got it. After a while, I decide to make her happy and do away with it. But how will I sucker somebody into taking this enormous desk off of my hands? So I go for a comedy angle. I list it for free on Craigslist as Donald Trump's actual desk. I live in a very liberal town, so I'm not sure this will go over well. I get a ton of emails telling me how hilarious this is, how they don't actually want the desk, but good job. Finally, a woman emailed me and said, "I'm a teacher, and Donald Trump's desk would go great in my classroom." I tell her if she wants it, she should bring a truck and possibly a man if she doesn't think she is strong enough for the two of us to lift it. She came alone, and we managed to get it in just the two of us. I hope the desk was a nice addition to her classroom. I needed a coffee table and found a neat one on Craigslist. The seller said the only time he could meet me was Sunday night after 11 p.m. at his house. I was too freaked out to go there, so I skipped it, and now I just shop at IKEA. Back when Gmail was a big deal, someone paid me $5 for a Gmail account. How ridiculous is that? Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a story to share, please do so in the comments below. Then be sure to like this video, subscribe, and then hit that notification bell so that you know when our next video is available. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.